This is a trebuchet I made in my backyard.
Hundreds of years ago, this was the most powerful machine on the battlefield, used to level walls, crush fortresses, and decide the winner. No engines, no electricity, just wood, rope, gravity, and physics, doing something terrifying. Anyway, can I pull it off? Well, over the last 3 weeks, I've been trying, and at the pull of a rope, we're about to find out if all my hard work paid off. So about a month ago, I started making this. I didn't really have a plan because I did zero research, besides look at one picture that I drew. Since I didn't really know what I was doing, I started with the base. That will be a rectangle. How hard could that be to make? Well, it turns out I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, and the base wasn't even or flat. Good thing I'm a lot better at breaking things than I am at making them. I took it apart and tried again. It wasn't perfect, and that's when I realized it wasn't my abilities, it was the fact that the floor was uneven. Considering I'm making a trebuchet and I need to know baseline physics, and I couldn't tell that the floor wasn't level, I've got a very big task ahead of me. Moving on, next it's time to add 2 posts going up that will hold the swinging arm later. I drilled 1 hole into each side and corresponding holes into each post. Using bolts, they stayed up. They needed 1 more hole at each tip though. I got out a bigger drill piece and drilled into each end. It'll make sense later. So the posts are on, but they're about as structurally sound as a house of cards. They need a little more. By getting another block of wood and cutting angles into each end, by the way, I had to use my jigsaw and the cuts are not straight, but it should still work. I repeated the process on 3 more beams that make up the support, turning it into an A-frame. I connected the new legs at the bottom with the bolts and used the screws to connect them at the top. This is pretty much most of the build done. It looks like a normal trebuchet and hopefully it functions as one. Next would be adding the swinging arm, and that's when everything went downhill, and you will see just how stupid I really am. But first, a word from our sponsor.
PCB Way. If you guys are into making stuff like I am, 3D printing is super cool, and PCB Way are perfect for any 3D printing that you need to get done. While I've got a printer, I can print stuff from home, but sometimes people can't. But if you just need one thing printed, a printer's very expensive. PCB Way make it really cheap.
All you gotta do is go onto their website, select the 3D printing or other services that they provide, fill out the required documents such as quantity, units, and material. By the way, they 3D print in metal, which is very special because you can't do that at home. So even if you have a 3D printer like myself, you can still use their services.
It's as simple as drinking a cup of tea. Or I guess water in this case, because I don't drink tea. That water went all over me. Yeah. Anyway, back to the build.
The arm needs to be divided into 3s. At 1/3, I need to drill a hole. This is the hole that's going to connect it to the rest, leaving 2/3 at the other end. This makes the weight uneven, and it's very important that it's a ratio of 1 to 2. So far, it's going smoothly, but it's when I added the counterweight when things took a turn. The counterweight. I want to use this. It's 10 kilos or 22 pounds. To connect it, I got out the arm and drilled another hole into the shorter side. I also got out some cutoffs from earlier and started drilling into them as well. What a great time for the battery to run out. Good thing I had a spare. Remember that metal pole from earlier that I didn't mention at all? That one right there. Yeah, it's too long, so I cut it shorter, and the 2 smaller pieces would be perfect for the counterweight. I would use them to hold the counterweight onto the new pieces of wood. But they won't stay in place. By getting a rivet and cutting off the tip, I drilled a hole into the metal pole and used them as a pin to prevent it from sliding off. Once sliding the pegs in place, I then bent them so then the pegs themselves couldn't move. And now I could test the counterweight. So you may have noticed that it shook a lot. Here is where my IQ really starts to show. I thought it was because I used a counterweight that was too heavy. This is what actually caused the problem. You see, by having 2 moving components connected to each other, the counterweight arm will shake out of control. This is like physics 101. A simple fix would be to get rid of the middle arm, the middleman, the piece of wood in between the counterweight and the actual swinging arm. But instead of that, for the next 2 weeks, I did everything else. So, since I thought the problem was my weight was too heavy, I thought I would change it out for water. Why water? Because 1 litre is 1 kilo. One of the bottles is 1.25 litres, and that means one bottle is 1.25 kilos. Also, the reason I went with water is because I can easily adjust the weight as I work. Other stuff would work too, such as sand or small rocks. So I taped and tied it all together and gave it a safety shake first, before putting it to the test. You may have noticed that I removed the actual problem, being the extra wood. That didn't fix it, however, because the rope I'm using to connect the bottles to the arm is now doing the same thing that the wood was doing. I was so close to fixing it. I thought by adding more weight to the base, this would somehow help. To be fair, I did need to add weight to the base eventually. This will stop it from sliding side to side later, or even flipping, but I doubt that will happen. In my deluded mind, since the arm was technically going past 90 degrees, I thought it would work. Also, ChatGPT told me it could still work, but I still wasn't convinced it would. I knew something needed to be done. I had 2 spare pieces of wood left over from my last build where I made this. It's a spear thing. Regardless of if the arm was working or not, I still wanted to do this. By getting that extra bit of wood, I'm going to add them to the A-frame. This will make the A's stronger. I did not add them in the most graceful way, but hey, if it works, it works. The nails did poke through a little bit, so I did have to clean them up. She looks a lot better and felt a lot stronger, but we still haven't solved the problem. That's okay. I just did what I do best, and that was ignore it and move on. Moving on to a part that is a lot more important than you might think. I need to add a floor to the trebuchet. This floor will have the projectile on it and will help guide it while it's still on the ground. Without it, the sling will get stuck and the whole thing just won't work. Making this part was the easiest part of the build. I just got a bit of wood, cut into it twice, and hammered it into place. While working on the base, I also wanted to add a latch to the side. This will be the release mechanism. If I was to attach it straight away, the rope wouldn't be able to fit. Getting more scrap out, I cut off 2 blocks. Unfortunately, the small one was a little too small, so I had to cut a second one. I would be connecting them here. It was a simple process. I lined everything up, drilled a pilot hole, and hammered. By the way, if you don't know what a pilot hole is, it's a hole that you drill to prevent the wood from splitting when you start hammering it. Although it's not perfect, it does work. Most of the time. That split wasn't really that bad because technically I don't need that part of the latch, I only need the big piece. I just hope I put everything in the right place because my drill completely tore the shit out of the screws. Even if I wanted to move it, I can't now. The rope of choice I'm going to be using is paracord. It is strong and doesn't stretch too much. The first thing I'm going to be tying it to is the release mechanism, so I can be at a safe distance when it goes off. So if anything does go wrong, I'm far away from it. Getting the swinging arm back out, I drilled another hole and added this O hook. By getting more of the paracord out, tying it to the O and the release mechanism, at the tug of a string, now the trebuchet will swing. Speaking of which, it's finally time to figure out how to fix this. Once again, I thought it was the weight. I thought I'd empty a bottle, but these bottles have been shaking around and I'm using sparkling water. Look, they were the cheapest ones there, okay? Guess what? That still didn't fix the problem. I guess the only thing I can do is more procrastination. There wasn't much left to do, I just needed to make the sling. The length of the rope must be 80% of the length of the long side of the arm. The long arm is 790mm, so times that by 0.8 would mean the rope needs to be about 632mm. I gave myself a little wiggle room and attached it to the fabric that will be used for the sling. Okay, I promise this time I will figure it out. So I moved on from thinking about the weight and I thought about the metal bar. It was quite loose, and the tops of the A-frame were shaking. I was slowly getting closer to the actual culprit, so I got out these. This is a hose clamp. I connected them to each side of the metal pole, so now it won't move side to side. This will just make the top of the A a little stronger. But it still didn't work. Back to thinking about the weight. I added more this time. Look, I'm not the smartest person. It didn't work, obviously. Who would have guessed? But finally, I had a brain moment. the cogs started turning. I needed to stop the weight from doing this. I couldn't be bothered untying the rope, so I just cut it off with this cool knife I made. Go check out the video. This time I would just tape the bottles straight to the wood. I was getting somewhere, but the tape just wasn't the go. This time I was going to use more rope. Kind of regret cutting it all up earlier. And would you look at that? It solved my problem. The sling still wasn't connected to the arm. So I took the arm off and I got out a nail and I hammered it in on an angle. It's very important that this nail is on an angle. I also added the last hole to the arm. I stringed it all up and this is how it looked. One loop goes in the hole, the other over the nail. When I release it, the arm should swing, the rope will slide off the tip of the nail and release the sling. But the sling was coming off too late. I changed the angle of the pin and tried again. But it had the same results as before. So I cut off the hangover end of the nail and I would add the projectile to the sling to give it a little bit more weight. I was so scared that this would send the balloon over the fence and I would break something. And it was really anticlimactic. It needed way more weight. I added another 3 kilos, which really helped, but I had to take it out to the front for a real test. It worked, just it didn't throw it far. I needed more. I needed my original counterweight. The 10 kilos. I don't really have enough room at home, so I took it down to a park. I set it up, and the whole time I was shitting bricks because I thought someone was going to come over and kick me out, whether that be a park ranger or the cops. But no one really cared. I just looked like a crazy man. In fact, the gardener kind of just stood there and watched. By the way, most trebuchets are not portable. I made mine a little bit different just so I can move it around. Also, the projectiles are going to be water balloons. I wasn't sure what else to use, and also I thought it'd be cool watching them explode on the grass. I could have used fruit, tennis balls, or even a rock, I guess. If you guys have any ideas of what I should use, let me know, I'll come back in the future. The trebuchet launched the balloons about 10 to 20 meters. It's not far, but for a trebuchet this size, that's actually to be expected. It was quite cool watching it launch, and I was so happy it was finally working. But there is something I can do to improve it. By getting another 10 kilo weight that I was using to hold down the trebuchet and adding that to the counterweight, in theory it should swing with more force. And my first attempt kinda failed, but after some tweaking I got it tuned. And now it throws it further. Until this happened. The sling kinda just fell apart. But that's a really easy fix. The reason this happened is because I'm horrible at tying knots. It was a super simple fix and I could go back to throwing balloons. By the way, yes, I picked up all the rubbish. So water balloons is one thing, but I wanted to see what else I could throw. The next day I was down at the park again. This time I brought a bunch of projectiles, starting with a tennis ball, which didn't really work. I think it's because of the weight. It was just a little too light, and it just stayed in the sling. So moving on to the heavier stuff, apples. But that too struggled. I had to tinker with the sling. By making the sling shorter, both by the rope and with the fabric, the apples could be launched, and launched they were. To see just how much energy was being used, I set up a target. Little did I know this target would be the hardest thing to hit, and the trebuchet didn't really have a way to aim. Here's what I got after hours of trying. The few times I did hit the wood, the apple would just completely fall apart. And of course, the best time I hit it, I wasn't filming up close. Here's what the apple looked like after. The biggest problem was the fruits each acted different because of the different shapes and sizes. But by using cans that all weigh the same, I got much more consistent results. The cans were a lot stronger than the fruit, but they still took heavy damage from the swing. When I did miss the target, you could just see how strong it was because the dirt would fly up where it hit the ground. I mean, I even got one to popped from just hitting the grass. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and let me know what I should make next. So with all that, now I have a working trebuchet that I made in my backyard. Not sure where I'll keep it, but that's a problem for another day. Let me know what else I should load into the trebuchet. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.